can you first introduce yourself and tell us a few words about your work?
Yes, so my name is MONNICA Williams. I'm a Canada Research Chair for Mental Health Disparities at the University of Ottawa in the School of Psychology. I do research on the mental health of communities of color, particularly the impact of problems like racism. And I'm also interested in interventions, new treatments, and particularly the potential of psychedelics to help address trauma in people of color.
We are at a psychedelic conference, which is predominantly white, middle class. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say I was surprised, but most of these psychedelic conferences are primarily white people. And this is why we see a lot of the issues that we're seeing now as far as the research coming out, is that people of color have been underrepresented, and in part because these communities are largely white.
What's the reason behind of the underrepresentation of communities of color?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One of the first that comes to mind is the impact of the war on drugs. So when psychedelics became illegal, there was more scrutiny that was placed on Black and brown people. And the whole idea of drug users and drug abusers was used to criminalize people of color, to fill the prisons with Black people, because every community has issues with substance use, but through sort of selective targeting, Black people were incarcerated. And so there's much more danger around drug use for Black people. And so psychedelics, also like so many substances, being as criminalized as it is, so many of us just feel like we want to distance ourselves and move away from that as far as possible so that we're not targeted, so that we're not incarcerated, or even that we don't even want people to associate us with all of those bad things that people connect to drug use. And so there are actually many people of color who are involved, but they keep a very low profile. So they may not come out to conferences like this because it may feel too risky.
Do you think that Black people and other communities of color could benefit from psychedelic therapies?
Oh, I absolutely do. And that's one reason I'm here. Just seeing how effective they are at treating problems like trauma, knowing that so many people in these communities are traumatized, that really gives me hope, and also makes me want to work hard so that people in these communities can have the same access to psychedelics as they're rolled out, because we know that anytime there's like a new or cutting edge treatment, it seems like the people with the most advantages are the ones who get it first. And I want to make sure that everybody gets it, including and most especially the people who are the most traumatized.
The costs of psychedelics-assisted psychotherapy are still very high, which excludes many people from that. How can we change this?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's going to be high because the models that we're using are based on the research studies where you have a lot of, you have a psychiatrist that has to put a lot of time into the screening process, lots of medical tests are required, and then you have this two-therapist model, and the therapist time is very expensive. So all of these add up even beyond the cost of the drug. And you're absolutely right, as it's rolled out, it's going to be expensive. But the hope is that insurance companies will start to cover the cost of these things in places like the US. And in Canada, this will be picked up by, as an expense that the provinces will pay for as part of the medical plan. And then it will really be available to everyone.
As a therapist, what are your concrete experiences with patients when you use psychedelics?
Oh, well, I mean, the experiences, it's really kind of hard to describe. It's a whole different kind of therapy, not one that I was ever trained for originally. When I got my doctorate in psychology, nobody was talking about psychedelics. And if you were talking about psychedelics, it was as hallucinogens in the category of substance abuse problems. And so it was a real relearning experience for me. To see how we could actually use these substances to heal people. And I feel even a little humbled saying use the substances to heal people, because at so many levels it's like the substances are allowing people to heal themselves. And as a therapist, you're really mostly providing a safe container for that. And then maybe working with them afterwards about what comes up and how they may use that going forward. But it's really fantastic. You see people making so much progress with the psychedelics in such a short period of time compared to sometimes traditional therapy could take years. Sometimes people have insights like that on psychedelics that you don't see coming, but you're so happy as a therapist that people get there.
What training do you need if you are a therapist and you would like to use psychedelics in treatment?
So there are so many people that want to do psychedelic therapy. It's actually very interesting. I get probably an email every day from someone who says, how can I be a psychedelic therapist? And a lot of them are from people who are already therapists or in the medical field. And it's pretty easy because there's so many training programs popping up that people can engage in and get the training. What I find more interesting is the people who have no mental health training at all. Maybe they have studied engineering or music and they want to become psychedelic therapists. And it's like, well, I think you should get some training in how to do some therapy and counseling, because when people have psychedelics, sometimes, mental health issues that they have may emerge in different ways, and if you don't really know how to work with that, it could leave you a little lost. But so I encourage everyone to have some background in mental health before they do this work. We're actually developing some training programs at the University of Ottawa to help people who have some mental health background get the training so they can feel competent and confident working with people with psychedelics. So we have 2 micro programs, and then we're also starting a certificate program, and we're waiting for approval to launch a master's program in psychedelics. So it's very exciting.
How can we make sure that people of color get into psychedelics-assisted psychotherapy in greater number?
Yeah, so I think that as far as getting more people of color involved, I know there are many people of color who want to be involved, and I know because they contact me and they say, how can I get involved? And at the same time, I hear people of color saying that the training programs that they've been in or are a part of are challenged and are struggling around these diversity issues. So that's something that I think has to be an integral part of any training program, assuming that we're going to be working with people from all over, of all races, ethnicities, and cultures. We have to be prepared for whatever they're going to bring. And so any training program has to be inclusive of that, and has to be inclusive of people of color. And I think that part of it is going to be making sure that we're looking very carefully at who we're admitting, and that we're using standards and criteria that are going to include people rather than exclude people. Because so many of our professions have this sort of gatekeeping where they can keep out people that may be stigmatized for one reason or another, and have it look like objective decision making. And so the only way to get past that is to be very deliberate about saying, no, we intentionally want to have as much diversity as possible, because we know that that's important for the future of the field, and it also makes a better learning environment for everyone.
What substances have you used in your practice, and how do they compare in their potential of healing? Yeah,
so the first substance that I started working with was MDMA, because of the work that I had been doing with MAPS, and that's something that we want to continue through the Expanded Access Program. Also, we work with ketamine. At my clinic in Connecticut, we're currently doing ketamine-assisted therapies really as fast as we can. The bottleneck being that it's hard to find prescribers who feel willing and able to prescribe the ketamine, and that's going very well, except for it being slow with that bottleneck. And then also, I do some work with ayahuasca. I've organized actually a few retreats and workshop retreats in Ecuador, so that therapists and people of color can get training and better understand how these medicines work, and also have their own personal healing or insights, or improve their well-being through the use of these substances. And in the workshops in Ecuador that I've organized, they've included ayahuasca, but sometimes other plant medicines as well, such as San Pedro or psilocybin mushrooms.
Many of these substances, such as ayahuasca, have been used in a cultural context. Can we take out these substances from this context and use them in Western medicine?
Yeah, well, we know it contains DMT, and so, that's something that you can measure and you can extract. Ayahuasca itself is a combination of, two different plants, and then each plant has other things in it additionally. They all work together in a lot of different ways. And so when people do science and research, they like to sort of extract what they think is the active ingredient to sort of isolate the impact. But I think there's a larger understanding that happens when we have all of these natural, organic compounds working together that I think is going to be different than, sort of an extracted or synthesized type of substance. So I think that's one factor. But there's also the way that the medicines are facilitated by the traditional indigenous healers. They have different techniques and approaches that we don't use in Western medicine. We might call those spiritual approaches because we don't understand them. And I think that isn't going to translate as well into the Western medical model. So I think that there's going to be different ways that people can access medicines. And I think that's a good thing because not every approach works for every cultural group.
What's your vision about the future of psychedelics? Can they find their way into mainstream mental health care?
Yes, I mean, my hope is that they will be available to everyone, that they'll be available at all mental health centers, that all therapists will have good training in how to use them, that anybody who needs them will be able to get them, and that there'll be different modalities. There will be options in traditional medical centers, there'll be options in spiritual centers, in indigenous healing circles, in other sorts of avenues and contexts, in ayahuasca churches, like the Santo Daime, and that will have many different ways so that different people in different communities can find what fits them.